better if I unmuted myself. So thank you again for joining us for our April edition of the Pigment 101 webinar series. We're glad to have you, and we'll go ahead and get started. So I am recording this, so you'll get the link to the recording as well as the PDF of the presentation at the end after this is complete. And so feel free to share that with your teammates and colleagues as needed to be able to learn some more information. And like we typically do, if you have any questions, please use the chat box and I'll address them at the end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. I'll go off screen here so I don't distract myself. We are talking about the polycyclic high performance pigments in this webinar. And there are a number of chemistries that are included in this class of pigments, organic pigments. In here, it's important to note that this class of pigments accounts for probably about less than a quarter of the volume of organic pigments, primarily because they are have a high value in use in their application areas. They provide high strength, high technical properties that allow a formulator to get more out of that pigment for the particular color space that they're working in. In the chemistries, there are a number of products, color indexes in each of the chemistry areas of polycyclic chemicals or pigments. The ones that I've highlighted here are the ones that I have some information to share with you during this presentation. So they are high performance pigments, which means from a technical property perspective, they will offer your formulation high light and weather fastness results, high to the high side for heat resistance, as well as very good fastness of solvents and other chemicals in there. So those are the technical types of properties that come along with the high performance label that they get for these particular chemistry pigments. As we've always talked about, the synthesis of these chemistries produce about 75% of the performance of that particular pigment itself. From there, the remaining 25% of the properties is achieved by the choice of the finishing and surface treatment that are used for that particular pigment product, whether that be the mechanical version or the chemical treatments that are used for that specific product. So we'll start out with the anthranone. This is a unique area, primarily because there's really only one commercially viable and available pigment in this particular class. It's Pigment Red 168. It's a great pigment, very yellow shade, but it also does provide the highest durability of organic red pigments. So it's on the very high end of that high performance, especially when it's down to the very light tinting areas with TiO2. So it's always a very good choice when you need to be in those very pale colors. It does come with it a little bit of a higher cost versus other red pigments, but some of those technical properties that it brings with it are advantageous to a formulation. From a product and form perspective, so this is the first time that I'm bringing together the Legacy Sudarshan, Legacy Heubach product line, so to give you a feel for how these these color indexes show up in terms of physical products and the form of that particular color index. So you'll see these slides throughout the presentation that describes whether it's a powder form or in a liquid form and dispersion form, and what the trade names of the lines that they fall into. So in this particular example, the red 168 shows up in a number of liquid forms in the colonial, Hoikotit, Hostatit lines of liquid colorants, as well as a couple of powder forms. The Pigment Red 168 is a legacy Hoibach chemistry that comes to the new Sudarshan portfolio. Moving along in the class of polycyclic is the anthraquinone, Pigment Red 177. This is something that is more of a blue shade red pigment. I'm not going to go over the same high performance type of properties in here, and just really point out some of the uniquenesses with each one of these. So red 177 has good transparency, making it very nice to combine with effect colorants to give that great deep coloration to your formulations. There's not a whole lot of anthraquinones that are important from an industrial perspective. The 177 is one of those important ones. One thing to note, though, is it does have some sensitivity to to TiO2 with regards to the photo degradation. And so we always recommend potentially to consider using a CICP like a pigment yellow 53 to be able to get to that lighter color space, but still maintain that higher durability. What it can do for you as a formulator, that it does bring with it a very high strength level and transparency. So there's a potential for using a lower loading in your formulation and still get the requirements that you're looking for. Its clean, bright shade does allow it for a lot of options from a formulation perspective, especially when it's combined with inorganics, which don't tend to bring in it much chroma on their own. So there's an opportunity to get to those better chroma positions with a higher durability, high hiding aspect of it. And from the plastics application area, this is a very good pigment because it does have that high heat resistance and no warpage in plastic application areas. From a product and form perspective, this is one of the original Sudarshan legacy pigments to the full portfolio, and there are a couple of offerings in the powder form. Next in the list is the dioxazine, and in this particular chemistry family, there are two important color indexes that do stand out from a commercial importance perspective. We all know and love the Pigment Violet 23, and then also included in this is the Pigment Violet 37. The Violet 23 is a very unique pigment in terms of its shade. It's one of those shades where it's unique enough that it is very difficult to get to that actual color space with other color pigments. So a lot of times it might be that requirement to use it to get to those spaces. And it's an extremely strong pigment, as we all know. So it is used in a lot of different formulations, a lot of different application areas, primarily as a shading component, because you don't need a lot of pigment to get what you need for it. So it's a very cost-effective pigment, not looking at the price per pound, but its value in its use because it is such strong pigment in here. So it has a lot of offerings from a formulation perspective. We see its use in a lot of cases with respect to TiO2 to give that more blueness to the a white formulation, as well as pushing a blue shade a little bit more to the red side, with again with a very very small amount of the violet 23 in the in the formulation. One thing to note with respect to formulating with these types of pigments is that it does offer a higher surface area. So it's going to require a higher than usual dispersion demand to be able to get the proper dispersion, and gain all of that strength that it can offer your formulation. From a product for and form perspective, this is a very busy chart, so you can see that there's a lot of options for Violet 23 to be able to take advantage of in your formulations, both from the powder form as well as the dispersion form. So it will go into a number of different areas as needed for that particular application or sub-application. What I also try to do in a number of these slides is also to offer you some color design ideas of what it can do for you. So I've always where I include these, the highlighted items are the products that were used in these particular colors. So in February of 2023, we created this violet color using a couple of the legacy Sudarshan Violet 23s for this particular formulations. Moving on to the DPP chemistry. This is a very important chemistry in a number of different uh, application areas. It's interesting to note that this particular family of pigments was the last major chemistry that was developed in the early 1990s. There hasn't been anything since that's commercially viable in here. So we've all been through the whole red BO introduction way back when. So this class of pigments, family of pigments, range from the blue shade red all the way through to the more yellow shade orange, all bringing with it those nice properties of a high performance pigment. The red 254 though is the biggest volume in this class, this family of pigments in here. So think Ferrari red or Coke red, and you'll get to the color space that the pigment red 254 occupies. On the higher performance application area, like automotive or engineering polymers, is the pigment red 264. It's a bluer shade pigment, a little bit more transparent. So on the coating side in automotive, it finds a very good home with combination of effect pigments. To the red side, the orange 73 and orange 71 is available in the industry in this chemistry class to provide those clean orange pigments. So we spoke about the red 254 already. The couple things to note on that. This is one of those, another organic pigment that is sensitive to TiO2. And so care needs to be taken with respect to formulating in these very light tint tone type of formulations. So consider going a different approach from a formulation perspective and using like something like a pigment yellow 53 to get that lightness value. It also offers that great hide, but it still maintains the good durability in there. On the flip side, it's a very good pigment with respect to a near mass tone type color. So you have that in there. The red 254 is a very neutral shade, so it does allow for pushing it either more blue or more yellow with other high performance pigments. So it does take on that mid shade space that you can push one direction or another. From a product perspective, we have both the powder versions as well as the liquid versions to offer for your application area. Pigment Red 255 is the next in the series of DPP pigments. And each one of these, you'll be able to see how the substitutes and the structure that is on that substitution and how it impacts the actual color shade. In this particular case, this substitution results in a more yellowish shade that is more opaque in nature with all the same high performance properties. The Red 264, as I mentioned, this is something that is widely used in the more higher performance application areas where either high heat stability is required or high durability. Its transparent nature is very good, as I mentioned, with effect pigments in here. So it does find its use into some of these more technically advanced application areas for all of these properties. It's interesting to note from a formulation perspective that you really want to try to select a dispersant that works with this pigment in your formulation because you want to be able to get the most value out of that particular dispersion in there to be able to increase that strength. As I'm some of the things that it can do for you as a formulator is this is not one of those organic reds that is impacted by TiO2. So it does have that great usage from a weathering perspective. And the high heat stability makes it valuable for plastics as well. From a formulation perspective, here's a couple of formulations in both pigment and in plastics and in coatings. Just a simple formulation of the red 264 and a gold mica in here. So Pigment Red 264 comes from the original Legacy Sudarshan portfolio, so it completes the portfolio robustness of the new Sudarshan. Pigment Red 272. Again, a different chemical substitution on that particular backbone, resulting in another yellow shade red pigment with extreme high chroma and high hiding power. Pigment Orange 71. Now we're shifting over into the orange color space. Its substitution you can see here on the slide. Same backbone structure, just with a different chemical substitution on the end, resulting in a very transparent orange pigment with the same high performance properties. And then lastly, in the family of DPP chemistry is the Orange 73. Again, same backbone structure, different substitution, resulting in a more medium shade orange pigment. Again, this one does have outstanding chroma, but more of a medium opacity. And shows up in some areas in here. From a product perspective, this one shows up in liquid form in the portfolio of Quickiton. And now shifting gears to indanthrone. This is a unique pigment chemistry. Pigment Blue 60 is, as it's well known as. This particular pigment does provide some application-specific areas to consider. Because of its high durability, high heat stability, and resistance properties, it finds itself in more higher tech application areas like automotive, um, coatings and plastics, and then engineering plastics because of that high heat stability. It does bring with it, though, its bleach resistance, so it does show up in coatings for swimming pools. From a product perspective, this is one of the legacy Wbinar color indexes that comes to the new Sudarshan. Several products in the powder form are available. Indolin Pigment Yellow 139. This is a pretty good workhorse pigment in the red shade yellow, organic yellow space. This is a primarily used in coatings, but there's a lot of uses in other areas as well. It is to the red side in terms of shade, and can be both opaque and transparent, depending on the particle size that we achieve. Like the Pigment Red 254, this is one of those ones that is very sensitive to TiO2, especially in all letdown shades in here. So unlike the Red 254, which was very sensitive in the very, very pastel type shades, this is very sensitive in pretty much all combinations of TiO2. So we always recommend, in this particular case, if you need to be in the more medium to pastel areas, is definitely consider using a pigment yellow 53 or moving to a pigment yellow 110, which we'll discuss in a bit, to be able to get that exterior weatherability. However, it is a very cost-effective red shade high performance pigment. It does have good heat stability as well. As in the mass tone area, it does perform okay, good in the weathering area. So a very good pigment overall. So an example of the impact to the TiO2, as I mentioned, it is more sensitive in all spaces with respect to TiO2. So this example shows both the very light tints at a 1090 reduction, as well as a 50/50 reduction. And this is absolutely in a powder coating formulation, um, out to 3,000 hours of xenon. An example of how you can reformulate around this TiO2 sensitivity area. So a RAL 2000, this yellow-orange color, um, just happens to be formulated originally with all three very sensitive organic pigments to TiO2. The pigment yellow 139, the orange 36, and the pigment red 254. All three of those are well known to be impacted by TiO2. If we take a look at reformulating that to avoid the TiO2, we are using a couple of CICPs in the formulation, brown 24 and yellow 19, to get to that same color space. But what it also does for you is it provides some additional hiding power for that same color space. So that offers you as a formulator a couple of options. You can take advantage of that extra hide by reducing your P2B level for an improved value to your formulation, or you could choose to pass that along to your end customer, and they could provide the colorant at a lower film build and get the same hiding for that particular formulation. So there's a couple of options there to take advantage of that additional value with the reformulation. And out to 1,200 hours of xenon right now, we can start to see the delta between the full organic versus the combined inorganic and organic formulation in here. So we'll take these out to the full capacity here to get the final data. From a product and form perspective, the pigment yellow 139 does show up in a hostoprint formulation from the liquid side, and there are a number of powder versions to consider for your formulations from both the legacy Sudarshan as well as the legacy Wbinar perspective. Pigment yellow 110, the isodolanone, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this particular chemistry pigment is probably it is definitely the most light fast and weather fast yellow organic pigments known. It is pretty solid with respect to other ingredients in the formulation like TiO2. It is also has a very high heat stability, so it does offer options in the higher performance um, coatings area, like automotive, as well as engineering plastics, and to be able to give that those high tech performance application areas. It does bring with it some it's FDA compliance in there, so it does offer that with respect to plastics as well. Just a little information on the performance in plastics with respect to how the finishing is done. In this case, we're taking a look at a couple of formulations that were done for the plastics application as well as a coatings application. And heat stability, that's primarily dictated by the chemistry. So all of those are fully okay with that particular property. How well it gets dispersed, that's where we start to see the impact of the finishing choices for that particular product. In this case, the coatings grade doesn't disperse as well as the two plastics grades. Warping is one of those properties that is driven by the chemistry itself. So all three of these perform the same. Unfortunately, warping is not a property that can be attributed to the pigment yellow 110 chemistry. It does perform poorly in warping. From a product perspective, this is a chemistry that comes to the new Sudarshan through the legacy Sudarshan product portfolio. A number of products for both powder in the powder form for both coatings and plastics applications, and you can see here this color of the month development was done with a transparent version of the pigment yellow 110. Paralenes is the next chemistry in the family of polycyclic pigments, and primarily the more important color indexes in this class are the red 179, the violet 29, and the red 224. And again, it's a substitution on the backbone of structure that creates the actual pigment itself and the chemistry and the properties that come along with it. Typically, these come with a higher durability than others. They're primarily more transparent in nature, and they do have a very high heat stability as well. So they do tend to show up again in those higher performance applications like automotive. Coil coatings is another area because of the higher temperatures that are required for that type of application area. Engineering plastics is another plastics area where the high performance of these particular pigments do very well. And there's a couple of what I'll call more niche chemistries in this particular family. The black 31 and the black 32 do provide that IR reflective properties for those types of coatings. Red 179 is very popular, especially in plastics and in automotive coatings, because it has that lovely maroon shade to it, great transparency, so it does work well with effect pigments. From a a product perspective, this comes to us via Legacy Heubach. So it's a welcomed addition to the new Sudarshan portfolio. Shows up in powder form as well as a couple of liquid forms. And then the other one is Pigment Red 149, that does show up in a powder form as well. I mentioned about the two blacks that are in the family. This just gives it a little bit of an overview of the black 32 that is provides that IR reflectivity. Pigment Orange 43 is the next family in this particular grouping. It is a mid-shade orange pigment, nice high strength and good heat resistance, and can be seen being used in various coatings and plastic applications. From a product and form, this chemistry also comes to us from the Legacy Heubach. And there are a couple of powder forms of this particular color index available. Quinaquinones. Quinaquinones we've talked about these in webinars in the past. I call them in the red space, these are probably the workhorse pigments, because they offer a lot of value to formulations. There are three key areas that are important to the various applications. The unsubstituted, which is the Pigment Violet 19, the dichloro and the dimethyl substituted are the other two areas where they're very important. Of course, there are also modifications in solid solutions using quinaquinones, but they're not as predominant as these others. To give you an overview of how the shade is impacted by the type and the location of those substitutions, you can see here. Again, the unsubstituted is the Violet 19 that comes in two crystal forms, which goes to the red side for the gamma crystal, and the more violet side, which is the beta crystal. The methyl substitution is the Pigment Red 122, and the chloro substitution is both the 202, red 202 and the red 209, depending on where the substitution occurs. So the gamma shade Violet 19 is, like as I stated before, is more of a yellow shade red pigment in here. A lot of options here with respect to transparency or opaqueness, depending on where you need to be. The crystal shape itself is formed by 4 molecules attaching onto a fifth. That gives it that gamma crystal designation. These are definitely very good reds to incorporate into your color formulating toolbox, and they are very good from a weatherability perspective, not impacted by TiO2, so overall very good. There you go. Oops. Sorry about that. From a plastics perspective, again, I wanted to bring you a little bit of how the finishing impact changes with respect to some properties in here. So as I mentioned earlier, heat stability is primarily driven by the chemistry. So all these products um, in this chemistry type all have very high heat stability. This chemistry type itself does have a lower dispersibility in this particular plastic formulation, but it's not to say that it doesn't disperse. What this particular data set provides is just the impact of the choices of finishing for each of these products they result in a very different value with respect to dispersibility. And as I mentioned earlier, also warping is another property that is dominated by the chemistry itself. So the violet 19 chemistry is very good from a warping perspective in plastics. The beta crystal of the violet 19, that is the red shade violet color space. It's a stronger pigment than the gamma shade in here. Its crystal is formed by two of the molecules attached to a third in here. So it is tends to be more transparent. As I mentioned, very strong in color. This is something that is a very good use in combination with inorganic pigments, like I mentioned in an earlier slide with respect to some of the other pigments like the Pigment Red 264 to reach some of these other color spaces that also have high hiding along the way. I mentioned that it does have a stronger color versus the gamma version. So there's potentially additional value in use there by using less pigment in here. From a performance perspective, from the crystal differences between the two Violet 19s, this is the powder coating formulation, and here we're looking at how well the pigment flows in that powder coating formulation, and this chart demonstrates that there's an additional flow value coming from the gamma version versus the beta version in this formulation. So there's some property differences to consider. From a product perspective, we have a number of options available from both sides of the new Sudarshan in here, and you can see this formulation that was done using the Violet 19 Gamma as a base for that particular formulation. Moving along to the dimethyl substitution, which is the Pigment Red 122. This is another very important color index for coatings and plastics, as well as inks in all application areas because of its very unique magenta shade. It's very blue shade, but also has great strength itself in here. So it does have good weathering properties as well. It is a little sensitive to TiO2 in the very, very pastel range in here. So something to consider. From a performance perspective, I mentioned it in earlier slides, in a plastics area, heat stability is dominated by the chemistry, but the finishing choices used can also shift that particular one. And here's a good example of where that shift occurs in this heat stability. In this particular coatings product itself does impact that heat stability to the negative side. And then we also see the dispersibility differences based on the choices of finishing as well. And then again, the warping is dominated by the chemistry. So red 122 chemistry is very good from a warping perspective for plastics. On the ink side, again, finishing is very important to the performance. This chart shows the variety of viscosity and gloss that you can achieve based on the actual product itself in this particular NC ink formulation. I mentioned the sensitivity to TiO2. This is an example at the very pastel range. Not as great as we've seen with other chemistries, but it is something to consider at the in your formulation. From a product perspective, this chemistry does come has a very big portfolio from both sides of the new Sudarshan, and so you can see that there's a lot of options available for all application areas, as well as in both powder and liquid form. And in the one color of the month formulation that I have here, this is a plastic uh, application area with a simple formulation of red 122 and mica, a red mica, or a pink mica, I should say. And then moving on to the dichloro substitutions is the Pigment Red 202. Here the dichloro substitutions moves the color space from that more blue shade magenta to the red shade. So this one does result in a red shade application area. And then the 209 is the same dichloro, just the positioning of those substitutions is different. And this results in a more dirty or muted red shade in color. The strength, as I mentioned, the strength of these quinaquinones can be very good, but it all depends on the type and the substitution and the position of the substitution. So here you get a feel for how the substitution can result in the amount of TiO2 required to get to that 1/3 standard depth positioning. And also properties can change with that type and position of a substitution. Here you see how that can impact the light fastness and the weather fastness, depending on how the substitution is made. Last in the list for the polycyclic chemistry types of organic pigments is the pigment yellow 138. This is a very green shade pigment, and it does provide some very unique color formulation spaces that you can get to because of its very green. It is a very important area for both coatings and plastics. It does bring with it an FDA compliance in here. A little bit of formulation kind of heads up is that it can be sensitive to TiO2, and there's lighter formulations. And also, depending on your formulation, if you have a very high loading with certain types of binder chemistries, it can result in some chalking of that particular formulation. So just a couple of things to consider as you formulate with Pigment Yellow 138. From a performance in plastics perspective, um, the finishing does not seem to impact the properties very much here. The high heat stability. From a dispersion perspective, both are very good in here. So we took it to the sort of the next level when we take a look at film applications, and here we start to see a little bit of a difference in the performance based on the finishing choices made for for these two particular products. Chemistry wise is dictates the warping. These have a medium impact with respect to warping. Options, there's always options to get to a color space, and sometimes you need to be able to consider other options to get there, whether it be supply, whether it be cost, whether it be other technical properties that you're trying to achieve. There's always many options to get to a space. One of those ones is formulating for FDA, and understanding what options that you have. So Pigment Yellow 138 provides some options in that space with respect to FDA. So here are two examples where we're trying to achieve the Pigment Yellow 151 and the Yellow 180 space, but still maintain FDA compliance. And so what we see here is the Yellow 138 in combination with other organic pigments do provide that color space as well as the FDA. A couple of bonuses that come along with it is that to get to that color space, the total pigment loading is less than the original pigment that we were trying to match in there. So there's some additional value in use with these types of formulations to get to those spaces. So again, always more options available depending on what you're trying to do. From a product perspective, this chemistry comes to the new Sudarshan from legacy Sudarshan. Several options in both coatings and plastics are available. And then from the legacy Heubock side, there is a tint line or a dispersion line, the Heuke tint line that incorporates Pigment Yellow 138 as well. So that's it for this particular webinar. Next month we will peruse the azo pigments as well. And that'll be at the end of May, always the last Tuesday of the month. So take a look for that invitation to come out. And then in future series, we're going to take a look at the complex inorganic color pigments, or CICPs, as they're well known for. So at this point, I'd like to address any questions that you have. So if you have them, please feel free to put them into the chat box. I do see one here. It says, when a pigment is TiO2 sensitive, is it fading due to a chemical reaction with the TiO2, or is it more related to the contrast and color difference, making the natural fade more obvious? Well, those two things are still one and the same. There is a catalytic reaction that is prompted by the TiO2 in the presence of these organic pigments, and so that's what ends up creating the fade with respect to TiO2. So our suggestions for using other inorganic pigments, and we always suggest for these lighter yellow, orange, red colors to incorporate a yellow 53, is the intent there is to avoid that reaction from occurring. You're welcome. Is there any other questions? Okay, another question, can adjusting the grade of or coating on the TiO2 reduce the impact of sensitivity? Always a good question, and always one that I get asked a lot. And in my past experience, past life, this is something that I always looked at, and my experience tells me that no. Unfortunately, the coating that is put on, or surface treatments or additives that are put onto the various TiO2s, do not influence the amount of interaction between those organic pigments and the TiO2. Those are generally put on for the TiO2 as its own colorant in its own formulation, not to restrict the interaction. Another question, would you get the same fading with zinc sulfide as you do with TiO2? I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest with you, but a good one, a good question to ask. Any other questions? Okay, so there's no other questions, but if one does come, just feel free to connect with me. I'd be happy to help. We really appreciated everybody attending today, and we look forward to seeing everyone next month as we continue our series. So with that, I will let you get back to your day, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.